How's it going? It's been a while. No analog rhythm Mark II on the desk. Some really weird thing here. I don't know what this is. Like made of trees or something? I don't know. Never seen one before. Obviously, it's a magazine. I picked up this magazine probably a few years ago now. I had this copy when I was a wee lad when it came out, which is May 1994. So it's pretty old. For those of you who are familiar with the Future Sound of London might have had a hint there. Although they come back a bit, I think, at some point. But yeah, it just looks old, right? Because it's in print. What I thought I would do, and the reason I'm kind of showing this is because I had a hunch that we often sort of, when I say we, what I mean is like the people that are imaginary in our minds that we think of as people, the we's of the world, right? They don't actually exist. They're just the fears and the paranoia, the anxieties. So those people, or we, would kind of think that there's a kind of history, right? There's a history that's like established through the regurgitation of stuff. There's kind of rose-tinted glasses, things of the past having a slightly different sort of appearance now through memory. There's also new generations that have different interests in different eras. There's like a whole pool of stuff, right? But the thing that really kind of stands out is, like, for me at least, I mean, all those things are great, but I had this hunch that picking up a magazine of one I'd seen or read, or, well, I say read, I looked at the pictures in 94 and been, holy shit, this thing, I didn't remember this, right? Or this isn't quite how I remembered it, or I'd forgot about this. And I think also just the contrast of like a previous period for at least for me, the motivation of like carrying that forward to like now and the future. So I am not a nostalgic person. I find nostalgia quite problematic, honestly, for me. I find it sort of leans towards like, you remember the good old days when everything was, and then you interject like some made up sort of emotional thing. I find that really problematic. Maybe because I always got into electronic music that was always sort of future thinking, Future Sound of London being kind of one part of that. Really sort of pushing the boundaries was a phrase that was often talked about. Sort of this idea of like finding the edges of something and exploring it and experimentation, all that kind of stuff. And nostalgia is really, let's do that thing that we remember that was really nice. Let's do that. Wasn't that great? Let's sort of redo that. Like, wouldn't it be nice to go back? Like, fuck no, I would not want to go back, right? Like, there was loads of shit as well, So I very much like the time that we live in for all its good and bads. I think that's just kind of like, that feels really good to me. So that out of the way, by all means, if you are a nostalgic person who thinks, I would have loved to have been going back there, like this is a moment for you in your private mind to have that nostalgic moment. But I'm not going to be doing that. My reason is, as I said, like to sort of revisit this stuff and kind of think about it how it is today. So I'm going to kind of flick through the magazine. I don't want to spend ages on it. I'm just going to randomly, I've had to kind of flick through a few times. I still haven't really read it, which is hilarious. But yeah, I thought it's going to be interesting, right? It's going to be interesting. I think it's going to be interesting. So let's kick it off, right? So Future Sound of London, ambient electronic pioneers give you their vision of the future. So straight off the bat, it's about the future. Future music, it's about the future. Really interesting. You could also win an Akai sampler worth £2,000. It's pretty crazy. What else? We got Bass End Blowout. The other thing with this magazine, the comedy in this magazine is just it's kind of, we'll see it. But some interesting stuff on it, right? Novation Bass Station. Probably most people are familiar with that. The Synthology Clone 3. You might be guessing, is this a 303 clone? Hell yeah, it is a 303 clone. But I don't remember, and I've looked online, the Synthology Clone 3 ever coming out. So we'll get to that. The Control Synthesis Deep Bass 9. I had the t-shirt of this, another Clone 3. So there's a bit of a Clone 303 thing here. We have a free CD. Nothing's free, right? You would have paid for this, but you know, lots of user demos, people that could send in their music, and then a whole load of stuff in it. Obviously, like magazines are still right. Magazines are still out there. You can still buy this on the shelf, right? I've not been into a magazine shop for a while, so yeah, it makes my my explanation of paper kind of like not funny. But you know, I'm not a funny person. Anyway, some interesting stuff. We got featured on Richard H. Kirk from Cabaret Voltaire is in there. We've got some filter stuff. We got some mixers. We got some sort of the Blue Notes, which is kind of like user. What do they call it? Like people writing in. What do they call that? People writing in. We'll get to it. So I want to kind of flick through. There's a rating system as well, so you can kind of see like what you want to pick, which is kind of cool. Check this guy out, right? When was the last time you saw a synthesizer being advertised? In fact, what is even this synthesizer? It's a good question. It's on this page. We have like, oh yeah, the tear out bit for the CD. So this is a tear out piece. So we'll skip that. These guys are pretty fun. The classic duo format. I think some of the demos on this were pretty good actually, from memory. I think they were doing like some techno stuff. TV imagery and high tech are important factors of rank, which is the artist. So that's what it says. Again, right? Technology seems to be really important. But this guy's tech is a suit and some glasses. Fly High, the SE, the S2 Turbo, General Music. The S2, yeah, I guess, I don't know what this is. The S2 Turbo Music Processor, General Music. Okay, so that's the manufacturer of the synthesizer, or maybe it's like a performance synth. PCM samples, some programmable sounds. Seems like maybe sample libraries. So you probably can't read some of this text, so I'm just going to read it out. But some sequence. This is like a workstation essentially. Maybe that's the gag. He's got a suit on. I don't know. Maybe that was an in thing back in '94. I don't remember it being. So this is something that I don't remember existing then or now. This is our editor. He's gonna continue his poor humor throughout. I wonder why. This is interesting. Virtual reality for musicians. And it has a picture of a Tascam multitrack, which these things are really expensive on eBay now, all multitracks, which I hilariously found out as I threw out our multitrack thinking it's worthless. And then I realized that was an expensive mistake. We've got the Atari STE in the background running Cubase. I still have one of those. So it's interesting. I don't know what the virtual reality reference is. There's no mention or any humorous tie-in to the text. I don't know. Maybe, so you've got your MIDI set up about your vocals. So I'm guessing, right, you can record other sections and it's almost like it was real, like a different bunch of musicians. Is that what they're going for? VR obviously meaning quite a different thing now, even then really. But I remember virtual reality being sort of something that might have been like Lawnmower Man, even that seemed like out of touch. Tron, this kind of idea of virtual reality being not something we would necessarily have experienced like reasonably in the future, like 10, 20 years in the future, but like way in the future. There'd have to be some major sort of breakdown. Maybe that's happened. Maybe it just looks different. We've got some other kind of crappy stuff, but I want to skip through because there's a lot of pages. There's a Future Music CD and get a record deal. So people who sort of contribute their music and appear on the CD. So this is a sort of, I've kind of glazed through this, but this is sort of like, a situation where someone who had sent something in and got picked up a record deal. It's this idea that you could land a deal, you could kind of get signed, you could get exposure, but through print and through post is kind of sort of interesting. It says a lot, right, about relying on other mediums and the sort of validation of other people, getting signed, all these kind of like ideas that sort of have very different meanings now. But you often have people talk about that. You often hear bands talk about, Depeche Mode looking for a keyboardist they advertised in, I don't know if it was Future Music, probably Sound on Sound magazine, something similar. What else we got? The Korg X3. We let others blow our trumpet, sax, and flute. Okay. Korg has a very different brand now. Like, if you think about it, like this is something you'll see quite a lot through this magazine. The kind of technology is not marketed towards the genre in which it's often used for. So digital synthesizers are the kind of new thing. So 94 would have been the analog boom had just happened, or kind of was in the process of happening. Digital synthesizers, very much like people getting rid of their analog stuff and buying digital, was kind of sort of like early 90s to mid 90s. So we're still on a kind of like analog boom. You could still buy stuff reasonably cheaply, although it seemed like getting out of reach for some people, for sure. What else we got? Roland samplers. Let's have a skip through. I don't want to go into that. This is cool. So like a whole page just full of like multi-tracks, random sort of different products, trying to pick some stuff out, like the FXR stuff. Like I vaguely remember this company, the JD800, $1,000 only, with a 2-year guarantee, you know, because eventually those sliders and that big chunk of plastic is going to go wrong. Yeah, lots of kind of sort of random sequences, but also just the kind of like billboard look to the whole thing. Like it's a massive just mush of colors and, you know, advertisement. We got some Emu Proteus stuff. There's often a lot of technology stuff in there. Here we kind of start already seeing, right? Mentions of the 303. So this is something I've noticed all the way through this. 303 is mentioned a lot, like on just, you know, it's often a synthesizers compared to a 303. They no longer have to put up with dodgy Roland 303 deals and retrofit. It's mini retrofits. Yeah, someone was asking me actually about this, about like they heard some acid music that I recommended and wasn't familiar how the 303 could sound that way. So you got this sort of old technology like retrofits. We see that stuff now, but often convenience dictates the setup of that synthesizer, right? As opposed to a necessity to have it changed for us to be able to use it, and that enabling a certain sound to happen. So less by sort of design of sound and flexibility, it's more like I can't use this unless this is done. So, and then it ends up having a different sound. So the old school kind of 303 retrofits, like MIDI retrofits or Kenton kits, like CV and Gate fitted components, will like really change the sound of the 303 quite a lot. Yeah, even here, right? You probably can't. Maybe I can hold this up a bit. Is that going to zoom up? Yeah, I think you can probably see that. So, why does every dance track have to have a fucking TB-3 on it anyway? He grumbled. So this was definitely a thing. I was chatting to my friend Tony about this the other day. Like, just 303s were everywhere, like absolutely everywhere. Just everywhere. It was insane. Like every track had a 303 in it. And we'll come back to that. Oh, here's an interesting one. We got some controversy companies here. We got the old Behringer. I actually had one of these, the Composer. This was these were quite cool boxes. Like they were kind of like, they used to do these multi boxes with lots of compression, noise gates. They used to do different things for enhancing your sound. I think the Composer. Oh, sorry. There was another one. I don't think it's listed here. That was like kind of like a vitalizer. You'd have like you know, air, so like the high ends would be boosted, all this kind of thing. You can still see these knocking around. We actually have one here. I'm looking at it far off in the distance. They have like I think it's this one. It's maybe not the Composer. We have something else. It's like 4 compressors in one, so then you can chain the compressions together, which is quite cool. Good for experimenting, because if they break, and they will, because they always do, then it doesn't matter because they're cheap. This is a cool section. So we've got the PV sampler. You remember the PV sampler? No, nor do I. The Roland the S760 and the Akai S2800. Which this is the magazine that really prompted me to buy one of these. They are expensive. I was fortunate to come into a few £1,000s from the unfortunate passing of a relative, which enabled me to buy one. And this magazine really kind of helped me like decide, really, I'd have to admit, by looking at the pictures and already deciding the Akai is the one you want to get, because Akai were the samplers. And also, I think the main thing was you could see the waveform, so you can't see what you're editing on the other ones. There was something interesting I noticed in the breakdown. There is a typo. This is the Roland. But in the breakdown, it says about the Akai S2800 has phase locked. Here it is. The resonant filters and phase lock stereo are further points in its aural favor. So because the Akai S2800 was the first one I had, and when I got the 900 and 1100, whenever you switch between the menus on the screen, so like for those of you who haven't used an Akai, which I assume is many, like you have these little kind of you have these little function buttons, and you can kind of flick through the different menus, like much like the analog rhythm, but they're just these are like the pages kind of thing. And every time you flick through on this one, it sounds fine. You would sometimes get some jolting if the sequence was playing. So like if you're playing a MIDI sequence through this, because it hasn't got its own sequencer in, and you flick through those menus, the MIDI will jolt where it doesn't keep the data. But the 1100 and the 900, the sound changes as well. So imagine that, right? Imagine buying a piece of equipment. I mean, I can't think of what equipment's out there now that would do this, but maybe some of the kit stuff. But yeah, so you would switch between the pages, and the whole stereo field changes. So like where you'd have a sense of like stereo, it would suddenly shift. There was this kind of sense of where the phase is going in and out. And I always thought, why is it doing that? Is it like, I thought it was a malfunction. Turns out, no, it's part of the features. So it looks like they've locked the stereo in. So even when you're flicking between pages, it stays as it should. It should in quotes, as you'd expect. It's probably the better way to say it. So I really love that in the 1100. The 1100 does it. Well, they both do it, but they do it in slightly different ways. Yeah, I love having the 1100's got built-in effects, so it becomes more noticeable. So it can be quite weird if you're in a certain page and you're editing, and then you flick to a different page, the sound that you've tweaked suddenly changes. Like, we're not talking massive changes, we're just talking a sense of stereo placement sort of shift, like the phase essentially. So that's kind of weird. So it's good to learn that that's actually something they improved. And the 2800 was a sort of a budget, like a budget pro entry, versus the 1100 that when that come out was like multiple thousands. I think it was like $3,000 when this come out, whereas the S2800 was only just shy of 2. I think I bought mine for like 15 or something. Little mention of the Ensoniq SAR10, massive sampler. I really wish I had one of these now. Like, I've never used one, but everything I hear and see about them, really, really cool. Music Village. I'm not sure if Music Village is still going around. But Behringer Specials. So again, we don't, like, really different, right? Behringer's not doing all the kind of clone stuff that they're doing now. Whatever your views on that are, I have mine. I'm happy to share them if anyone wants. But I think you can probably guess. But they used to clone stuff back then as well. They used to do like massive Mackie clones. Famously, they cloned the Mackie mixer when the Mackies had a fault in them, and they cloned the fault, which is quite funny. But obviously, yeah, if you want something that's a replica, Behringer are the people. Phonic mixers. So a friend of mine used like the phonic mixers for really heavy distortion. They were like your budget, real. Like, this mixer was basically like Maplin's, like this kind of cheap electronic store we have in the UK. Well, actually, I think they're no longer around, but used to be like any sort of DIY electronic store. You have them in the States, whatnot, that provide you like a basic mixer. Studio Master would have been a bit better, and if Studio Master's probably more well known. Phonic was like the really cut down one, so you could get like a 24 track mixer for like £769, which is brand new, which is crazy, or a 16, 16 channel for roughly the same price, which is interesting. Oh, it's a rack mount, that's why. Or like a couple £100 for like a small mixer. It's pretty cool, great value. Excuse me. So this was like the beginning of like companies being able to offer you something on a more affordable rate, and Phonic were like sort of arguably leading on that. They started going into I think they went into a few other things. Did they go into effects units, or was that somebody else? I forget. Maybe we'll find out in the other products. But yeah, a few companies started doing more affordable stuff, because otherwise you were talking like quite a bit of money for stuff. You know, if you wanted to buy an effects unit, you were talking the best part of £500, which is kind of crazy. What else we got here? I think this is all brand new stuff, although brand new DX9, perhaps £149. What else we got here? Alpha Juno 1 299, called Poly 6 249. You wait till we get to the free ad section. People selling their secondhand gear. It's quite crazy. This I don't remember. I guess this come out analog filter bank by Analog Systems. Interesting review. It basically says it's not very good. It doesn't. I think it's this one. Yeah, it doesn't really provide you. Like, it doesn't provide you with the analog sounding filter quality that you want out of a mono synth. And for £299, you just as well buy a mono synth, which we'll get to. Some old school hardware mixers, more Akai samplers, buying old softwares, Novation base station mentioned in. It's just really brand new, very new, interesting period. What else? We got some more mixers, a phonic mixer. They're pretty cool. This was like their second sort of generation or third generation. They look a bit more slick there. State of the art. So Art Effects. I think these guys were something to do with MXR, I want to say, or something to do with Oasis. I think like maybe the people behind Oasis split into two companies. I might remember this wrong. I'm sure I am. But there's something to do with Art being, I want to say, connected to the pedal space somehow. But Art were like the sort of slightly cheaper version of the Oasis sort of range, I guess, was how I kind of understood it, like 199, 299. So like if you wanted the quadriverb or mini verbs, anything like that, and that was a bit too expensive, you could go with the Arts. And they were like very 80s, sort of pink, kind of colorful. I almost had an Art, but I didn't bother. I bought an Oasis in the end. Kind of interesting. Just some average person using a mixer and a computer, not like trying to sell you a genre, not trying to like, sell you an image. It's just like a person using a mixer versus say like a whole kind of performance finger drumming, I don't know, like dressed up in the latest gear, whatever, like sort of promotional material that we see now. Not better or worse, just quite different how dry it was. And how I feel that opened up like abuse of this equipment, right? Like this is sort of like buying music equipment from, I don't know, like a professional feeling, like a business, not like a culture, and then creating something unique with it. It's kind of interesting. How the Prophet, so the Prophet won. The Prophet won, the price to pay. I always think this helps provide some context. So the Pro 1 cost about £350 when it was first released, and prices dropped to £100 before the analog boom. These days, expect to pay between £150 to £200. It's got £50 to £100 more. This is the boom. If little did we know how much booming was going to come. Amazing synth. A friend of mine has one under a bed, I believe, in his parents' house. John, if you're listening, which you almost certainly aren't, but he really needs to let me have it. Amazing synth, super nice condition, this one. Obviously it's not that old. The Korg M1, this is kind of crazy. So the M1's resurfacing. So like there was a lot of written by Mark Jenkins. I think, isn't he like signed to Warp now? Am I thinking of the same person? Mark Jenkins, I'm sure he does like Warp stuff. Was he like part of Reload? I forget. I always get those names muddled up. I think he is. So this is talking about the M1. And like the 90s would have seen like it says a resurface in the M1. You would hear these choir sounds for sure, like loads of the house pianos. Like the M1 was on everything, being kind of sample based, and that sort of technology being able to have access to those sounds. So it's got it mentioned here. So the promotion of like old equipment in the relationship with like the genre of musics that are coming out, and you'd have to say future music are predominantly like, you feel like they're like ravers by night and editors by day. It almost feels in some cases. I'm appreciating some of this might be blurry, but like I don't care too much. Anyway, the M1 is still very much alive today, and there's a busy second-hand market. Blah 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 blah. Expect to pay up to £900 for an M1, which is crazy. £650 to £750 would be money well spent. So like you just wouldn't spend that much money on one of those nowadays. I mean, I'm assuming I bought my M1 for like I think 100 and something. Digital kind of sample based synthesis, obviously with laptops and what stuff, maybe not as relevant today would be the argument. I've used the M1 a lot. I've used the M1 plugin a lot. You'd think they were the same because they're digital, but they're not. They just sound different. The hardware always just sounds different, and it's just kind of crazy. The Lexicon Alex, this was kind of like Lexicon's entry level. You could get a Lexicon reverb for, well, so much sound for so little money. Yeah, this was like, you want a Lexicon? Here's your chance. So this was £499, I believe. Doesn't say the price here, but it could be less. Could be yours for less than £389. Maybe I got ripped off. I'm sure I spent more, but then I was like very young, so who knows? I probably was. Pretty cool basic reverb. Yeah, here's the 303 stuff. So to be or not to be. Yeah, kind of interesting. So you could listen to a lot of these things on the CD. So you'd hear like different sort of reviewers, editors, whatnot, kind of making sounds, musicians by day, no doubt. Kind of making kind of little sketches, making little acid patterns. So you'd be listening to that CD, trying to see if you think it sounds like a 303 or not. Also noticeable that the original Novation base station doesn't have some of the external filter stuff and conversion stuff like MIDI to CV or whatnot that these competitors at the time did. And I'm pretty sure I remember the rack mount version come out a little bit later that did have all those features. So if you want the external filter, the base station 1 rack mount has that. And I think if you want to do MIDI to CV and gate conversion, which the Clone 3 and the Deep Bass 9 has, the base station does not, but the rack does. So it's a cheap kind of converter. Well, cheapish. Probably better things to buy now. But so that's kind of interesting. Lots of talk about the 303. The reasons like you want to have a 303, like it's all about getting that 303 sound. So you can kind of I feel like when I scan through this, like how much media plays into like with anything, right? Like plays into the idea of like, we need to get the 303, especially if you're someone, the equivalent of this, I feel is like forums to some degree. It's not, because obviously forums are made of people that are chatting, not like, not like a paid for narrative, like a magazine, but it's a blurring, right? Because we've got YouTube, like everyone on YouTube's a mini fucking capitalist trying to sell a product to try and make a living, right? Fair enough, you've got to survive, but it kind of is worth seeing where like the translation of like what this sort of shows and what what emphasis might be put on certain products and the desire of people and what impact that has on what you want to do, whether that's making music or just collecting synths or, just playing around in your studio for hobbies or whatever. It's all quite a big thing. You just, the urgency of like buying a new Electron product or the urgency of buying I see Moog's got a new thing out, right? I don't have to look for this stuff. You just get bombarded with it. So it's kind of, as always is, right? It's ripe here as well. You can get a real 303 sound without having to go out and buy a secondhand Roland bass line. But decide for yourself if they sound the same. Does that sound familiar, right? Like the constant A/B narrative, like online, does it sound the same? That's why I find it quite exhausting, because This is 94 and it's still going. I have students at point blank ask me similar things, which is better. I get the question, but it's sort of you wonder where that comes from, you know. It clearly comes from sort of a narrative developed, you think, off the back of trying to make money or something. Anyway, I digress. What else we got here? Some effects units. What else? Some sample CDs, I believe. Yeah, so like CDs that had samples on them. It's kind of I don't know how many of you have had a sample CD. Like, it's a very, you might have downloads of them, but it's a very weird thing. I absolutely loathe them because you'd have to put in a CD and listen to like a bass drum, another bass drum, a slightly longer bass drum, a snare drum. It just, you know, and you didn't have these things credited as like in the inlay bass, you know, and even if they did, what would they call them, right? Slightly more bassy bass drum. So you typically had like 909 drum sounds, and then you'd have like 15 minutes of dung, dung, you know, or stabby acid sounds. So you really had to kind of quite determined to sit through lots and lots of really dry sounds and then this is the reason you'd listen to it, is to think, be inspired to be creating something. Maybe I need a sound I want. So unless there's a particular sound you're looking for, you know, often I found it much easier just, well, honestly, I didn't sample anything because I just found that whole process, so, you know, sample from elsewhere. I used to just create my own sounds and then put them in the sampler. But yeah, many of my friends would sample from records. And that kind of makes more sense. Like with hip hop and techno and whatnot, you get really inspired by a record, or it's like it's your identification in some way, right? You identify because these are things you're into, like sampling from film, and then just wanting to put them in your records because it just was fun, you know, as opposed to this sort of like more sort of streamlined, professional sounding enabler tools that we have now. Is like, you know, algorithmically finding sonic representations of sounds you might already be using, right? It's a very different sort of search process, which I think both are valid, right? They just put you in different places. So I think it's really cool. Sting, let's just move past that. Future Sound of London, what a cool section. If this was my original magazine, I'm sure like the book would have just opened to this page. It's probably the only part of the magazine I've actually read. I used to find the imagery like incredible, really weird and abstract. It was kind of like old school computer graphics meets sort of photography meets they did a really sort of interesting job at just shaping a world. There's an interesting YouTuber who's been doing lots of like, almost like a historian approach of Future Sound of London and various stuff. Has been quite sort of, the guy's really into like details, which is great for that video. But if you're not interested in listening to someone talk about track lengths being seconds apart, then maybe skip it. But I recommend it. I'll sort of link to it. Future Sound of London kit list. So we have a very long list here of stuff, and then there's Earthbeat Studio at the bottom. I do believe I had this piece cut out and stuck on my wall as a boy with blue tack. One day I will have a studio like that. I think I had these wooden shelves and stuff to try to, you know, create that feel of like I'm creating new interesting music, right? To think a piece of cheap wood would do that. But cool, because there's like abstract imagery, really creative, really interesting, really new. You didn't really see somebody own so much of their output, whether it's like whether it's just the music, but it was also the imagery, it was also their videos, everything. So which is kind of really interesting. Take a lot of inspiration from that. They were kind of full of shit as well, but in a kind of palatable, good way, I think. Loads of stuff here. They had their own media section. They had their own printing, they used internet before internet was a thing, almost like ISDN, which was like some magical thing where you could like phone up and send data through the phone. and listen to them, they were performing from their studio. Like, it's like magic. Yeah, so like loads of samplers, loads of effects units. Interestingly, not as many synths as you'd think. There's obviously some stuff here like Oberheims and Korgs and things. I mean, they've got a lot of stuff, but yeah, it just goes to show, I suppose, like where their priorities were. And also within the equipment list, a sort of quote around that they didn't use a sample on this particular track. It was they really played the sounds. So the being like validating the originality in around predominantly sample-based electronic music and having to justify is kind of evident, because you can't even have an equipment list without saying, wait, I can play a guitar, you know. It's not all just samples, as if that matters. Yeah, check this out. I've not read this bit. Phone call. Future Sound of London are hoping to play live gigs from the comfort of their Earthbeat studio. Come again? The ISDN, Integrated Services Digital Network phone technology, is all that is required, it seems. You plug the left and right outputs of the mixing desk into a black box, and the music is broadcast down a digital phone line to a radio station or any receiver with a second black box. We can have a live electronic band, but do it in an environment where we feel best, the studio, rather than lugging gear around like quasi rock and rollers, says Gary, which is one of the band members, and hopefully will turn electronic musicians onto the games you can play with the media that you don't have to be an avant-garde and beyond people. Stop press. It was confirmed just as FM Future Music went to press that the first of these ISDN swivel chair extravaganzas can be heard on the Pete Tong's Radio 1 show on May 14th. I tuned into that. It was ridiculous, amazingly good. The feeling, and this is something I've recently kind of gone back to, and it sort of tweaks my mind a little bit, because obviously the internet's happened, as many other things. The idea that you can play live from your studio to people somewhere else, it was like, oh, that's a really good idea. Maybe I should do that more, is kind of what I felt. And then I thought, wait a minute, that is kind of what I do anyway, isn't it? But it's something about YouTube and streaming that is different from a live performance from the studio somehow, that this isn't talking about the internet and the whole kind of baggage, if you want, or like culturally developed sort of practices, behaviors that we've kind of, you know, as I say, sort of developed as this technology's been in our everyday. This is sort of like doing what they do, but just playing over the internet. It's kind of strange. It just sort of feels a little bit different. And it sort of twigged for me. I was like, maybe I can think about live performances a little bit differently. Incidentally, they talked about they were less a band, and they kind of shifted into this idea of they're a broadcasting network, or they're a sort of transmission service, something like that. So they've gone from the idea of being band members, as we just said, right? We don't want to be some like rock and rollers, quasi rock and rollers. So their associations are kind of like the sort of what would it be, like Brian Eno's band, like those synth heads that are like playing massive pieces of pseudo intellectual music, and then the kind of rock and roll attitude that comes with that. So it's the culture and the expectations of how people operate, right, mixed with what they're doing, and sort of understanding what it is they're doing, and understanding how technology can help them deliver it. It's just a subtle tweak, but essentially you could say, when we look back at Future Sound of London, ironically, they have played like live a bit, and they do end up seeming like rock and rollers, honestly. But these things go in circles often. But still, their idea at that time was to create something interesting, to create new, and using technology to do so, which I think is just a more interesting approach than feeling compelled to like, oh, I must do these things because that's what things need to be. Like, I must set up a Facebook, I must set up a YouTube, or I must be on Twitch or something. Richard H. Kirk does some cool stuff for Warp. Cabaret Voltaire. I wasn't massively into Cabaret Voltaire, honestly. Bit too. I need to try harder. I think I'm missing a trick. But I love Richard H. Kirk's kind of sense of rhythm. Really cool. Instantly, loads of old school drum machines. stacked on top of each other. Also, like reference to old rack mount modules. This is really old stuff. MXRs, some old lexicons there. Stuff I don't even recognize. Maybe some old Roland stuff by looks of it. Yeah, it just has a slightly different look to what would have been the 90s Oasis kind of rack world. So it's interesting that even then is kind of like old technology and new technology. Obviously, you'd have that, but for the 90s, and what kind of sounds it would be more orientated towards, like kind of like post-punk band sort of pedal in rack format, kind of like guitar orientated, vocal orientated, instrument orientated sort of frequencies versus the more what came to be more developed experimental tools for like the 90s, I'd say, in the 80s, technology, whatnot. Some old synthesizers there. Also, this is kind of like often the only access you'd have to, like, you know, what you might want to buy. So you would be holding this up really close and being like, what is this? This looks like, what's this, Juno 80, Juno something? And then you would sort of flick into the back into like where people sell their, you know, don't know where it is, somewhere in the back. Yeah, the wanted section or marketplace. And then you'd see, oh, maybe there's one in there that has a similar name, Juno 6. Juno 106. So you'd be like, oh, okay, maybe it's that. Juno 106, right? Analog synth, excellent condition, £325. There's a telephone number there. Maybe we should ring them up. Have you still got your 106, mate? Like back from 94? I'll buy it. So, yeah. But let's come back to this. I want to flick through some other things. Win an Echo sampler. Didn't win one. Lots of synthesis stuff in there. This would have been really helpful if I'd read this back in the 90s, but I never did. It seemed like very complex. So we're lucky that, you know, you've got someone explaining to you, variety of different people explaining to you how synthesis works, which is really cool. And not having to just to read and study. I found that particularly difficult. Someone with like crazy analog gear. It almost looks like Pete Namlick, but it's not. I don't know. We'll move past him. He's flying planes again, right? Oh, this is cool. Andertons. These guys are still going. Same address. Like, I think it's Jack who does the comical rants. Probably wasn't born, maybe. I don't know. He seems quite young. Maybe he was like 1 or 2 or something. Very different look. So the Andertons that we might know now, you can see them online, whatnot. This was your interaction with them. Very different. So I think that's quite interesting. So if you're into electronic music or making music, this is your entry to Andertons, not, you know, a whole sort of branded thing. It's kind of interesting. I'm going to skip through some more stuff so this video is not ridiculously long. Excuse me. I'm still getting over a cold. You can probably tell. The Amiga Music X, this was like the first piece of sequencer I used. It is purple and ridiculously hard to, even these images are quite hard to see what's going on. That's pretty much as it was. I made loads of Jean-Michel Jarre cover versions on my Amiga and Music X. So I'm kind of confused why this is in here, because I definitely remember doing Music X stuff before the 90s. So I'd have to read it, which I haven't done. But I'm guessing get to grips, because it was a bit weird to use. So maybe that's what it is. More sample CDs with some questionable fonts. Get some free merchandise though. What else we got? Kind of getting near to the end. Lots of different software, which is interesting. These sorts of pictures, as I said, I only looked at the pictures, were always captivating. These kind of almost like 80s offices. You can imagine, I don't know, doing your stocks and shares in there, but we've got a big console, acoustic treating, big rack of stuff. Also, this is quite cool. So this is a lot of the back issues. So we've got Gary Newman one, some other bits. Liam Howlett of The Prodigy is in this one. That was the first one I bought. I haven't got that anymore. I had his Tascam mixer in there. I think he had just bought, he had his W30, he was still rocking. I'm pretty sure he's still living at home with his parents at that point, from memory. Yeah, like he had started gigging, I think, more locally, probably a bit more internationally actually, but still like had an advancement from XL Recordings to buy his mixer, kind of that sort of deal. But otherwise, it's like a mixer in his bedroom. JJ from The Art of Noise was in this one, the sampling, so big sampler issue. The Shaman, Aphex Twin running down the underground. I think that's in the London Underground. I'm not sure what station that is. Maybe some of you Aphex nerds would know, from his Polygon Window album single. 808 State 1, The Orb was pretty cool. I think this was when the UF Orb album come out from memory. So lots of kind of like, I want to say lots of talk about like the tension of Chris Watson, I forget his name. Maybe I remember the dates wrong. Utah Saint. I missed this one, and this looks like Orbital. So I don't think I really knew of Orbital yet. I think I found out about Orbital a little bit later when they did their second Glastonbury performance, I think, 95. So it would have been the year after. Yeah, so Kate Bush, I think Evelyn Glennie there. Yeah, so loads of people I'm more familiar with now, but like would have just been probably random faces at the time. The binder you could put your magazines in. every magazine would have a binder. Kind of funny. So X-Demo and secondhand market and music control in Stoke-on-Trent. So you could buy, what could we buy? MC202 for £249. It's pretty good. Sequential Profit 600 £600. TB-303 £499. So the TB-303, the price I always remember from when I was younger was 500 quid. It was like 350 to 500 was your bracket, and 500 was sort of taking the piss a bit. To think the price what they are now is just nuts, absolutely crazy. SH101 249. What else we got in here? Let's have a flick through. Some more kind of bits, more advertisements. I think we're kind of getting near the end. Yeah, kind of lots of help stuff in there. Blue Notes, which I think is just lots of different people asking for help on particular things, like addressing it. Like I have this issue, almost like reminds me of the Games Master guy. For those people that are based in the UK, there was like a TV program of like role playing and D&D and computer games. I think it was computer games, and you'd write in and ask them how to get past a particular level, or like ZX Spectrum magazine. All of these things had that in the back. I'm sure they still do, but it's like this whole section is, the back is like a big section. So a huge area for user demos, for help on stuff, which is quite cool. Lots of information about the tracks and the people behind them. So almost like a bit of details on the demos for the front of the CD, which is kind of fun. Expose yourself. Okay. Interesting. Yeah, I probably glazed over some of the bad comedy in there. Buyer's guide, which is kind of nuts. So you could look for the going rate for something. So that's kind of crazy. See if you're getting a good deal. Yeah, so let's have a look at the marketplace and then let's get out of here. Maybe I'll go and have some water and some chocolate because I feel like I need some energy. Our Odyssey, 450 quid. It's all right, isn't it? It's not bad. What else we got on here? Korg M1, 650. So as we know, that's a good price from our knowledge that we've picked up. Yeah, 106. Juno 106, excellent condition, one owner, not gigged, £235. And a Yamaha X15 drum machine, 120. Phone Jill after 6 p.m. in Essex. So it always reminds me that there's the time that you have to find them. So there was a paper that we used to get as kids that was called Free Ads. I think you had the Loo from memory in London. Basically like a whole paper that's dedicated to selling shit before eBay and all that kind of stuff. And if you wanted to get that thing, right, you had to wake up, rush to the newsagents, get that newspaper, and phone up. And you'd be waking people up at like 5:30 in the morning, 6 a.m., really groggy. Like, are you selling your 303, mate? And they're like, can you fucking phone later on? And you're like, no, I'll give you like 50 quid over you're asking. I'll come down now. Is that sort of deal? So there would be first time, if you first caller, first sale sort of thing. So you'd get people trying to, like, they'd phone up later, but they'd offer more money. Just loads of bullshit. But you did go out and you did, meet people, get different prices, learn about people's music and, that kind of stuff. But yeah, ultimately the price was like quite a lot less. SH101, excellent condition, great sounds, complete with mains adapter, can deliver locally, £170 on their offer. Amazing. SH09, I do want one of those. 80 quid, slightly damaged. It's just, yeah, you sometimes see some prices that are just really, really cheap. Okay, drum machines. We've all got to look at it. The Roland TR909, £550. Like, that's all right, isn't it? I mean, would you spend £550 on a TR909 today? Like, if the prices were not, all crazy, that's just how much they're worth. Is that worth the money? Like £550, I suppose back then was like, I don't know. It wasn't like crazy expensive. It was sort of doable. Even for like a paper boy, like maybe if I work all summer, I can maybe scrape enough and sell my Amiga. I could buy a 909. There's that kind of idea. Sampling, sound modules, miscellaneous. You sometimes got like, people looking for singers. Like this, right? The Roland TB-303, 6,200 303 samples on that, and audio cassette for £9. Yeah, interesting number. 6,300. Is that like a 303 mathematics? I'm sure it's not, but still. Anyway, I feel like I'm done. I'm done talking about this. We can sit back and be like this fella with his waistcoat. Like, he looks happy, doesn't he? Korg again, right? I'm sure that stuff. So anyway, feature music, 1994. I thought that was interesting just to kind of go through it. Me rambling, absolute sort of rubbish for far too long. But it just, I don't know. It's sort of kind of interesting just to kind of reflect and think like where we're at and how much of this is sort of the same shit over and over again. And ultimately, do we want to be buying gear? Do we want to be making music? Like, do we want to be sat watching some idiot online flicking through a future music magazine, or going and making some fucking music? That's the question. Anyway, I'm going to get out of here. If you got this far, go do something better with your day. Would be my advice. But if not, thanks, I guess. I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.